So this is Loyal Rue's Everybody's Story, his third book, published in 2000. We've just finished talking about his first two, Amythia and By the Grace of Guile. And I loved this book. I'd like to start off reading something that I use when I do guest sermons in Unitarian Universalist congregations as Michael and I are traveling along the road. This is one that I often read. In fact, it was my closing words for just this past Sunday at the Unitarian Congregation of Cedar Falls, Iowa. So here it is. The story of cosmic evolution reveals to us the common origin, nature, and destiny shared by all human beings. It documents our essential kinship as no other story can do. This is no contrived shamanistic legend. This is not a bit of clever tribal tattooing. It is more like the real thing. This story shows us in the deepest possible sense that we are all sisters and brothers, fashioned from the same stellar dust, energized by the same star, nourished by the same planet, endowed with the same genetic code, and threatened by the same evils. This story, more than any other, humbles us before the magnitude and complexity of creation. Like no other story, it bewilders us with the improbability of our existence, astonishes us with the interdependence of all things, and makes us feel grateful for the lives we have. And not least of all, it inspires us to express our gratitude to the past by accepting a solemn and collective responsibility for the future. It's that last line where I feel it takes the cosmology and moves it into the morality right now that Michael and I feel with climate change.
Yeah, there's actually there's like 3 or 4 quotes of yours that we use as like readings in church services that are just sort of your mythic language, heroic language, where you sort of encapsulate the story in what we find to be just a really wonderful way. Talk to us about everybody's story, wising up to the epic of evolution.
Well, where did it come from? Why did I write it? I had been teaching a course with a biologist on biodiversity. Actually, I think it's the oldest or the longest standing undergraduate course on biodiversity in the country. Anyway, it was, this is sad. Every time we taught that course, we teach it sometimes in the January term, I would get so depressed. I just couldn't go on. We moved it into one of the semesters to get to be a longer course. He would teach the first half, I would teach the second half. And by the time I got done with the second half, by the time the semester was over, I was so depressed about the world and the future and so on that I could hardly go on. That's why I quit teaching that course. Somebody else stepped in and took my place in it. But I started to put together some material for this course, and I had recently read a book by Gerald Barney, which talked about the global problematique. And so I picked up that phrase, global problematique, and used it in this book and in the class. And I basically just wanted to get at the environmental problems that we're faced with, and then follow it with a thumbnail sketch of the universe story as a way of equipping us to respond effectively to the global problematique.
Your first book, Amythia, your last chapter was a prophetic call to action, a very different voice from the objective philosopher presenting the arguments in the beginning, where you were calling forth the myth makers, the storytellers, the musicians, the artists. Did you feel yourself trying to step into that role of storyteller here to actually fulfill what you were calling?
That's a good question, yeah. I basically, there are some poetic moments in that book, and that's as poetic as I can get. I think it's not poetic enough, but I was inspired to write the book, and I felt that if I let the flourishes develop, that was okay in a short book like that. It's not a substitute for doing serious reading in big history or cosmic evolution. It's just not. Go to Eric Jason and get it started there. So it wasn't an attempt to compete with more scientifically rigorous account of the story, but to make it popular, make it accessible, make it not as artsy as song and dance, but to get it out there in accessible form.
Were there any ideas in there that, I mean, obviously, personal wholeness, social coherence, the bringing together of the cosmology and the morality, facts and values have been crucial to you in everything you've written. Was there anything new in everybody's story that you went, I didn't have this 6 years ago when I was working on Grace of God?
There are some things that were in earlier things about the integration, the artful integration of cosmology and morality. That's basically where I ramp up into any discussion. But there is an argument in there that tries to circumvent the naturalistic fallacy, because it's always there in the naturalistic. You can't mix facts and values, and so I wanted to get around that. So there is an argument in there that basically affirms that life is an absolute value, and if life is an absolute value, then you can understand life factually, and so you've got the values there. That's a way around it.
So you take it as your fundamental axiom that you don't have to prove, you just start there.
Well, no, actually, I had an argument, there's not a very strong argument, but about as strong as you can get for affirming that life is an absolute value, and that is that the decision to take life away is a decision to undermine the conditions of choice, and so suicide is irrational. Of course, we all know that, but anyway, that there is an argument there that tries to, and I don't think I've seen that argument before.
Yeah, whenever I talk about the naturalistic fallacy, I don't talk about it that much, but I think it misses the point to talk about you can't get values from facts, or just from what is to what ought to be. The way I talk about it is that we're always going to be creating, because we're humans living in a symbolically language-created world, and we have to live in community. We can't not have values. We can't not have a sense of ought. You ought to live this way, not that way.
It's a property of the living system.
Yeah, exactly. And so the question then becomes not can you derive as the only set of oughts from nature the way it is. It's like, are you going to get your sense of morality and values from mythic stories, or are you going to get them from our best evidential understanding of reality? And to me, one of the things I have found helpful in understanding not just nature the way it is, but when you look at the whole epic of evolution, the whole big history, you do get a sense that we keep finding ways of creating greater systems of cooperation and interdependence at larger and wider scale. And there's a sense of the necessity of aligning self-interest at multiple levels, so that if you want to continue, if you want society to continue, if you want healthy humans in the future, then we need to find ways of doing that. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I'm getting an ought, not from just nature the way it is, but from the patterns that have led to greater complexity, interdependence, and cooperation.
But the ought begins with, if you want to maintain life.
Right. But
okay, well, why would you want to maintain life? I mean, that's where it really gets to be problematic. Is life good? No, you shouldn't smoke because it causes death. Smoking causes lung cancer and death, therefore you shouldn't smoke. That's not a valid argument. You have to have in there the middle step that says death is bad.
Only if you're an academic philosopher, you need that. We don't speak.
Most normal people don't.
Normal people would not ask for something below that. We start with what normal people would take as an
because
assumption.
they assume that life is valuable.
Right, and we
Okay.
talk to normal people.
I know, but my problem is, what justifies that assumption?
Who cares?
Who the fuck cares?
Oh, I cared because.
Because you're a philosopher.
Well, okay.
This is one of those things.
Well, okay.
It's one of the reasons why I didn't go on to do a PhD in philosophy, even though it was undergraduate.
Well, you have to have reasons for believing certain things.
Why?
And I.
No.
Why?
Why? We are pragmatists.
Yeah.
We see our world is going to hell in a handbasket. We see a way of getting people to alter their sense of where they see something to dedicate themselves to bigger than themselves, and that's all we care about.
Okay, you're way down the line.
Yeah, exactly.
This is sort of infrastructure thinking,
All
right?
right.
So I had to have this argument that would
Sure.
convince me that it's okay to say that life is good is a kind of uniquely, not absolute, but uniquely important value. Okay, so that's a good beginning to say that.
Right, but then when you go on to say, the whole thing of death, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time talking about is the role of death in the universe at all scales.
Yeah.
And that I think that it's an evil, and I use that word very deliberately, it's an evil to assume that I should be kept alive at whatever cost to the next generation simply because life is good and to end my own life is bad. Bullshit. Well, I've let both sides of my family know, Connie and I have given a living will to both sides of our family, that if or when we ever get to the place where we can't in any meaningful way contribute to society or like taking care of grandkids or whatever, or we become a burden on society or others, we're going to call our family together, we're going to say our goodbyes, and we're going to honorably take ourselves out.
Right.
So in that sense, I don't see suicide as the ending of life. I think there are ways to do that are actually pro the planet.
No, right. Basically, you're saying that in the interests of personal wholeness and social coherence on the global scale, I've made my contribution. I've enhanced those two basic human goals as much as possible.
And what Connie's what Connie has been regularly saying is that now social coherence and personal wholeness aren't enough. Ecological integrity has got to be that third value.
Okay, sure. So you're willing to snuff yourself out when you've served your purpose.
Correct.
Would you push the button that snuffed out all life?
No, of course.
No, of course not, because that's the ultimate value.
Yeah.
Right.
It's unique in that sense.
Yes. No, I hold life's. I like that term, reverence for life.
Yeah.
I have a sacred relationship to life, but that is. But I don't see death as the problem. I don't see it as evil. I don't see it as human.
No, death is there's a discussion of that in everybody's story too. I think.
Oh, right. I got it marked.
Death
My
is being,
favorite
exactly.
death passage there, that whenever I'm doing a death program, I read. So here's a quote on death in everybody's story, page 80. And you're talking about the role, the kind of creative role that death serves, how necessary it is. And then you say, in the wisdom of this scheme, it becomes difficult to view death in a negative sense. The inevitability of my death is now beheld as a necessary condition of the life I have. A mere entrance fee to be paid on the way out. We must die because we get to live. To the extent that I cherish my life, therefore, I have reason to be profoundly grateful for my death. And what you have said in a number of your talks and essays, because I usually edit this, where you say, a mere entrance fee is death, to be paid on the way out. What you normally say is to be paid at the exit.
Mm-hmm.
Death is the entrance fee to be paid at the exit of life. Beautiful.
Yeah, like that's the one great gift that Connie gave me that I didn't have prior to our relationship, is understanding death at all scales of the cosmos, from the death of stars to the death of mountains and everything else, as natural and necessary, and thus no less sacred than life.
Yeah.
I built that into a song. Death the entrance fee, paid on exiting.
Yeah, I remember that. I had forgotten that.
Yeah, and
That's
it's actually
great.
been used in some Unitarian contexts.
That's great.
Yeah. So the poetry is there. I mean, it really is there.
Do you know Ed Wilson's book Creation?
Yes.
the greatest thing about that book is the way he starts it out. He's talking, he addresses himself to a fundamentalist, to Baptist, to, you know, his background, and says, you know, but let's look for what we have in common. You believe the Bible, and I think that's nonsense, and so on. But you know, we have the creation in common. So he said, you can find the line. So let us meet on the near side of metaphysics.
Yes, that's a great line.
And work on those things that we both cherish.
Yes.
Isn't that a wonderful
Yes,
line?
that
Yes.
is.
I've used that so many
That's-
times,
Wow.
just in conversation. Never used it in a speech or anything, but I think that's such a wonderful, wonderful phrase.
That is.
Let us meet on the near side of metaphysics.
Fine.
It puts an end to the stupid conversations,
Right.
or to the stupid avenue of conversation
Right.
that you could get into with people.
Right.
It just stops that,
Yeah.
and keeps you constructive.